Okay, so I realized that talking about emulation on iOS is straight away just gonna have people in the comments like, oh, you could install Cydia Impactor for decades and just put RetroArch straight on your phone. But let's be realistic for a second here, that's not something that most people are going to want to do. With Apple finally opening up the App Store to third-party game emulators, we're ushering in the golden age of mobile emulation on iPhone. Just about anyone can download Delta from the App Store and get up and running playing their favorite retro games again. So today, I'm going over Delta and Provenance, two emulators you can download, or at least will be able to download straight from the App Store. No sideloading, no computer, nothing. I'm gonna go over how to set both of them up, get your games running, and have you playing your retro games in however long this video is. Let's get started. Okay, so Delta is what most people say is the first emulator that was on the App Store. It wasn't, it was iGBA. It was a rip-off of Delta's predecessor, GBA for iOS. Delta was the first emulator that stuck around for longer than a week before it was taken down by the developer or Apple. If you've kept up with emulation, or even just tech at all, you've definitely heard of Delta. It topped the charts of the App Store internationally when it launched, and it's the easiest one to get up and running. To get Delta running, just open the App Store, search Delta, and download it. How easy is that? No more alt store, it's great. The only caveat for installing Delta is that if you're in the EU, you'll need to install it through I know I just said no alt store, but if you're in the EU, you'll need to install it through the PAL version of alt store PAL, the EU alternative marketplace version. That's only if you want to do it without a computer. If you don't mind using a computer and re-signing every 7 days, you can still use alt store just like normal. Alt store PAL is €1.50 a year and can be installed from altstore.io. I'll leave links to the documentation for alt server and alt store PAL in the description below. Once you open Delta, you'll notice that your phone looks awfully similar to a PS5. Delta, Provenance, and probably every other emulator that launches on the App Store is not going to include any games, and it's certainly not going to include any you know if it does have any. As always, when emulation is mentioned on the channel, emulation is legal. Don't pirate your games, rip everything yourself, and you'll be all good. Now, realistically, will you get caught if you pirate games? No. Will Nintendo take me down for saying that you should? Probably. To import games into Delta, just open the game ROM file within the Files app. It'll put it straight into Delta, import the box art, everything, all automatically. You can also tap plus and then files within the app and select your ROM to do the exact same thing. Using the plus button within the app also allows you to put .zip and other archive files straight into the app without extracting them first. You can also hold down on the game to customize the information, like if the box art doesn't match exactly. Delta currently supports most popular Nintendo retro systems, those being the NES, SNES, N64, Game Boy, Game Boy Color, GBA, and Nintendo DS. Sega Genesis support is currently in beta via their Patreon, but as far as I can tell, that's not available through the App Store version. You'll need to be using alt store for that. The iPad optimized app is also available on the beta for Patreon, but it looks like that's the thing they're prioritizing bringing to the free version on the App Store first. The only system here that needs any form of configuration to play is Nintendo DS. To play DS games, you'll need to legally acquire the BIOS files and import them into the Delta app in the settings. It's really easy to get them imported. Just go to settings, then scroll down to Nintendo DS core settings. Once you're in, tap on the BIOS file you want to add, then find that specific file in your Files app to import it. Do that for all three of the required files and you're all set. Delta's configuration is very simple and doesn't leave that much in the way of customization and performance optimization. But the settings provided are excellent for most iOS devices. If you weren't aware, Riley Testett, the developer of Delta, has been making emulators for iOS for over 10 years at this point. He's got a pretty good idea of what he's doing. That amount of experience is very clearly shown in the user experience, interface, and performance of Delta. But there are still some changes you might want to make. Delta has a really nice UI in-game already, but it's really easy to customize the theming if you want. It's not 10 years old like GBA for iOS is, but Delta's been around for a while, since 2019 on the alt store, so it's got a lot of community support and designers for custom themes within the game. I'll leave some links in the description for you to download some themes, but once you've got them downloaded, it's as easy as importing a ROM. Just tap on the file in the Files app and it opens up and imports straight into the app. To apply the themes, head into the settings, and find the system you want to change under controller skins. Then just select the skin you want to use. You'll find that it's there as soon as you open a game for that system. It's that easy. Let's change the lighting. There we go. Delta also has support for any third-party controller that iOS has support for. The bindings are pretty good by default, but you can change them in the settings under controllers. If you've only got one controller connected, just tap on player 1. which should have your connected controller listed. Under Customize Controls, you can change the bindings for all the systems by tapping the on-screen button, then pressing the button on your controller you want to bind it to. You can change the system you're binding by tapping the drop down at the top of the screen. One binding that you might want to change is the buttons on Xbox controllers are still in the Xbox layout. You might want to change that to the Nintendo layout on Nintendo games, but I've just left them at default. Delta supports up to 4 controllers at the same time, including the touchscreen. If you've got multiple controllers paired, you can click on any of the 4 player options in the settings to bind controllers to a player. Delta has a ton of other settings you can customize, but the last one I'll cover here is the syncing. Delta can sync your games, themes, save files, save states, BIOS files, everything between multiple devices using either Google Drive or Dropbox. As an Apple sheep, it'd be nice to have iCloud support for Delta to just make the syncing easier. Like, it's an iOS exclusive app, so I'll take what I can get. It's a bit annoying that Delta's synced files aren't really human readable. You can input your saves and games into other emulators outside of Delta, but the file names are jumbled, making them almost impossible to decipher without just opening the games in an emulator.
My camera died, so I'm on my phone now. Yep, and I gotta read off the iPad. Once you've got Delta set up, there's a ton of cool features. But one of my absolute favorites, and probably one of the coolest, is the really great AirPlay support. It's a bit sketchy at points, like how the game selection UI doesn't mirror to the screen you're mirroring on, but in-game the entire screen is taken up by your selected game, with your phone's screen being dedicated solely to controls. In maybe 5 seconds, you're set up and ready to go on basically any AirPlay screen. And if you don't have one of those, you can plug straight into HDMI. That's made particularly easy on the iPhone 15 Pro with USB-C. You can check out my review for that somewhere. If you're playing a DS game, Delta uses the phone screen as the bottom screen and dedicates your entire TV screen to the top screen. That's the configuration that makes the most sense. It's basically a really small Wii U.
Maybe just use an emulator for Mac.
Unlike Delta, Provenance is much more geared towards enthusiasts of emulation, and it has a slightly more complicated UI that really matches that target audience. This makes it a bit tougher to set up, but gives it a lot more flexibility once you know what you're doing and have everything in the right place. Right now, Provenance isn't available on the App Store. The dev team plans to release on the App Store within the near future, along with a free test flight in the even nearer future. But currently, the only way to get Provenance without old store and sideloading is through their Patreon, where they have the test flight available. Their Patreon costs $5 a month, and once you've subscribed, you can just click on the test flight link to download it straight to your phone. You'll also notice that, again, Provenance doesn't include any games, but opening the settings will immediately reveal how much more complex and flexible Provenance is compared to Delta. Provenance is much more similar to something like RetroArch, including options for CRT filters, FPS counters, integer scaling, and even more core-specific options. I'm going to be going over mainly the basic setup of the app here. To get a game installed, you've got a few options. The easiest option is just like Delta, where you just tap on a ROM file in the Files app, and it opens up straight in Provenance. Alternatively, you can hit plus in the app and select local and cloud files to do the same thing. However, that is more useful here because it makes it a lot easier to import archives for multi-disc systems like PS1. As you would have literally just figured out, Provenance has support for way more systems compared to Delta. Those are, get ready for it, Atari 2600, 32X, 5200, 7800, CBS, ColecoVision, Famicom, Disk System, Game Gear, Game Boy, Game Boy Color, GBA, Genesis, Intellivision, Atari Jaguar, Jaguar CD, Atari Lynx, Master System, N64, NES, Neo Geo Pocket Color, TurboGrafx 16, TurboGrafx CD, PCFX, Pokemon Mini, PS1, Saturn, Sega CD, SG-1000, SuperGrafx, SNES, Virtual Boy, and WonderSpawn. And PSP. Before I got into emulation, I'd heard of maybe 5 of those. Provenance also lets you spin up a web server, which allows you to drop in ROMs from literally any device with a web browser, which is really cool. Some of the systems, like PS1, do require BIOS files, but they're a bit complicated to install compared to Delta's process. In the Provenance file system, either in the Files app or through the web server, head to the BIOS folder and select the system you need to add BIOS files for. If the system requires them, you'll be notified when you try to open a game from that system. Once you've found the system, just drop the files into the folder and you'll be all set. Like I mentioned, Provenance has a ton of customization and performance options. Getting into everything here would make this video at least half an hour long, but I'll quickly go into a couple of things that'll probably be useful for you. First off, iCloud Sync. Delta, please. Toggling this will sync your saves, screenshots, and BIOS files directly into iCloud. Weirdly though, it doesn't sync games, which is, again, really strange because of the platforms that it supports, which I'll get into later. You've also got options for haptic feedback on button presses, movable buttons to customize the layout of the touch controls, the FPS counters to display frames per second, and integer scaling to scale game resolutions as an integer instead of a decimal for a much crisper image. There are, again, so many options here. I'm going to link the Provenance documentation in the description below if you want to look more into that. Provenance does have one trick up its sleeve that Delta doesn't, however, that being its native platform support on basically everything. Every Apple device. Delta does run on iPad, Mac, and I believe Apple Vision Pro along with iPhone, but that's just the iPhone app running scaled. Provenance has native apps for iPhone, iPad, Mac, and Apple TV even, and I think Apple Vision Pro, which gives you a lot of flexibility in how you're playing your games, and it also makes it really annoying that, again, the iCloud Sync just doesn't sync games. The UI on Mac is honestly shit. But it does work, and the UI on other platforms is pretty good. I'm going to boil down the Mac UI problems to it being a Catalyst app. Each platform keeps all of the same customization and features that are available on the iPhone version, which is really nice to see, and it'll be even better when it launches on the App Store publicly and anyone can turn their Apple TV into their own retro game console.
Interesting discovery with Provenance. I have the BIOS files. They're in the folder, and then it just doesn't launch. Now, considering that I am talking about emulation on iOS, I want to quickly mention that RetroArch and PPSSPP are two emulators that launched on the App Store as I was creating this video. Sorry I'm so quiet, it's 12:50 in the morning and I'm up editing. Because RetroArch and PPSSPP aren't really exclusive to iOS, they're very, very popular emulators on other platforms as well. I won't be covering them that much in this video. Essentially, to get them both installed, you'll just want to head to either RetroArch or the PPSSPP page in the App Store and download them. I'll leave some links in the description on how to set both of those emulators up for other platforms. They should be the exact same on iOS.
The emulation scene on the iOS and the App Store is really just getting started. Folium is one of the other hyped and upcoming emulators that's launching soon. It currently doesn't have a beta or anything, but it's really hyped because of its Nintendo 3DS support at launch, along with Nintendo DS and Game Boy Advance. That will set you back $5 US, but cheaper than a 3DS. Unfortunately, the App Store is still the App Store, and it does have its limits. Most notably, DolphiniOS is probably never going to make it to the App Store because of its reliance on just-in-time, compiling to get playable performance. While Apple does allow you to request access to just-in-time as a developer, Dolphin was denied access. You can still install Dolphin via Alt Server to play your Wii and GameCube games, but you'll need to be near a computer to use Alt just-in-time. There was also another emulator that was released after I'd finished writing this called Gamma. That one's a PS1 emulator. It seemed like it had some promise. It's based on Delta's open source UI code, so it's very familiar to use, and it's made by Zod TTD, a name who will be very familiar to you if you've basically ever jailbroken an iPhone. This guy's been around for decades at this point. Unfortunately, I just couldn't get it to run well, even after I'd imported BIOS files. And even if it did, the controller UI is a bit janky, and every time you open a game, it loads up a 15 to 30 second unskippable ad.
Hold it.
Where did you get $1,000?
Bro, you just need to play Solitaire Master.
Well, okay, they are skippable, but it, like, skips into the minigame. It's really annoying, and there's no way to get rid of them. Not even in in-app purchase or subscription. And that's it. Now with Delta and Provenance, you've got a mobile emulation powerhouse in your pocket wherever you are. And you don't need to carry anything else with you. I can't wait to see what else developers bring over to the iPhone. A Switch emulator would be really cool. Probably never gonna happen. Nintendo, but that'd be really sick. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed that video, and I hope it helped you out. Try not to fall into the portable emulation rabbit hole like me, you might end up like me. If you like that video, you know what button to press, and if you really liked it, maybe even subscribe. You can follow me over on Instagram, Threads, and everything else. Oh, that threw me off, sorry. You can follow me on Instagram, Threads, and everything else with the links on screen and in the description below. If you want more videos, you can click over here to check out my long-term review of the M2 MacBook Air, or you can click over here to check out my recap and impressions of the Let Loose Apple event that just happened. Both of those videos flopped tremendously after the generational run I was on, but they're both really good, so you should go watch them. Particularly the MacBook one, I'm really proud of that one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.